The rain hammers the windshield like a stack of wronged letters, and I can barely see the streetlights through the smear of water as Mara's name ping-pongs on my screen with a new urgency I didn't invite. We're in the gray hour between afternoon and evening in Seattle proper, where the towers lean out over the Puget Sound like question marks, and the air tastes of metal and rain and coffee that's been sitting too long. My thumb trembles as I read the message. Mara says she needs to talk. It's not an invitation to catch up. It's a summons to witness something I'd sworn would stay buried. I pull into the curb outside her building, the tires sighing against the wet asphalt, and I hear a muffled thud from the trunk, as if even the car knows this is not a delivery she's going to accept gracefully. The door opens with a sigh of hinges, tired from all the yesterdays Mara has dragged into today. She's standing in the doorway, a silhouette in a damp coat, hair slicked down with rain and worry, eyes glittering with something I recognize all too well. The tremor of a woman rationalizing a danger she doesn't want to name aloud. "Come in," she says, voice flat as a road she's driven too many times. She doesn't smile, not yet, not with the way the apartment has started to look lately. Like a stage they've set for a play where the audience keeps seeing the same scene from different angles and calling it new every time. The room is almost lit enough to see the edges of the furniture and the arrays of cups and papers that Mara has stacked into a wary little fortress. She moves toward the kitchen, and I follow. The steam from a half-empty mug fogs the window, a small, impossible mercy, and a place where mercy feels rare and expensive. "What's going on, Mara?" I ask, careful to keep my voice even, to not crowd her with the neediness I've learned to hide behind minimal words and a patient smile. She sinks into a chair, the cushion sighing as if it's been waiting for this for months. "I don't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid," she says, and she sounds tired enough to hand you the world and watch it slip through your fingers. Her apartment has become a museum of careful lies told with perfect sincerity. I've known Mara for years, through the long winters when we pretended not to notice the chill in the other room, through the birthday parties where I watched her fake a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. We believed in the same things once: loyalty, truth, a future where trust wasn't a constant negotiation. Now she's telling me something that makes the room feel too small, like the walls themselves are complicit. She slides a laptop toward me with the kind of motion that asks for discretion, a nonverbal plea to protect what's left of her illusions. The screen glows, and the first file name leaps out with a cruel, clinical clarity. Receipts. In subfolders that trace back years, there are receipts from stores she's never stepped foot in, bar tabs with dates she wasn't within 100 miles of, photos with dates that line up with alibis, places, times, people, all stitched together to create what looks like a narrative Mara would want to believe, but can't anymore. A pattern sits there in those digital fingerprints, like footprints in fresh snow, that melt as you try to follow them. "Look at these," she breathes, and I lean in, not to confirm, but to witness. The archival trail would have been easy to dismiss as an isolated misstep if it were an isolated misstep, but it isn't. It's a pattern. A partner who introduces a crisis, a private investigator who finds proof, a clock that seems to be wound to the minute that makes Mara look guilty even when she's innocent. It's the same script every time. Different actors, same playbill, same moral of the story. Mara is the trouble. Mara is the story's problem. Mara can be destroyed if you're clever enough with paperwork and specks of deception. The breath in my lungs skews, as if someone pulled a curtain sharp across my spine, and I'm left staring at a version of myself I thought I'd left in the attic with a box of old diaries. Years of trust, frayed to the point of breaking, unraveling at the speed of a ping on a screen. Home becomes danger. Safety becomes a negotiated sentence, whose terms keep changing. "This is not just about Mara," I manage to say. Though I already know the answer, she doesn't want to admit she's asking me to confirm. Is this anyone else's fault but the world's way of catching us in lies? We tell to stay upright in a room that feels too crowded with the wrong kind of honesty. She nods, not at me, but at the truth that has finally decided to stand up and clap in the corner. All of my friends, she admits softly, and I feel a sting of guilt for how many times I've wondered if I was reading too much into things. If I was letting myself believe that a friend could protect another friend from the kind of harm that shows up as evidence. The thought clamps around my ribs. I click through the file, not to invade, but to understand. To map a coastline I never wanted to chart. The manipulated texts are their too long threads of messages that seem intimate and casual until you notice the moment they pivot at a sentence that's too precise, suspiciously convenient, designed to corner a truth that should have remained private. The fabricator never has to show up with the truth in hand when they've built a more convincing version of it out of the wrong words and the right fear. And in the margins, photos with Mara's face blurred to fit a narrative someone else once told. The screen blurs, and I have to blink back the rain in my own eyes. The rain inside or outside, I'm not sure. The room tilts, not dramatically, but enough to remind me of the way fear travels through a body. Across the chest, up the neck, into the scalp. A percussion that makes every sound feel like an accusation. Mara watches me, waiting for confirmation, or, more likely, permission to collapse. It's the permission we give to ourselves when the ground shifts. The moment we let ourselves acknowledge that trust isn't a buoy, but a fragile thing we cradle and pass along to others with the same careful fingers we'd use on a loaded gun. I've seen this before, she whispers, almost to herself. In my cousins, in my ex, she cuts off, the memory catching like a snag in a sweater. In the people I wanted to love me enough to be safe. The confession lands in the room with the quiet force of a door that finally gives way to a storm. I feel the echo of old nights when my own world was built for mistaken loyalties, the kind that demand you rewrite your history to keep a relationship intact when the truth would burn it down. The old me would have said nothing, would have told Mara to hold on to the person who says they love you and means it, would have insisted that the world isn't a place where every claim needs a witness. But the new me, no. The me who survived the last year with the noise turned down, just enough to hear the truth, knows how this game is played. And I won't be played again. The emotional tremor arrives not with a shout, but as a slow, invasive ache behind my eyes. A reminder that trauma isn't a single moment, but a chorus that repeats until someone turns down the volume. The pattern is not just about Mara, it's about the way a life is made to feel like a crime, until there's a whisper of proof, and then the whisper becomes a roar that tells you you're guilty by association if you don't defend yourself with evidence. Of your own, I feel the old familiar pull away, to retreat into my own safe spaces, to pretend I didn't see what I just saw, and tell everyone else that I don't want to get involved. It's the impulse that saved me for a long time, and that almost destroyed me when I finally stood up to what was happening to someone else. I don't want to be the kind of person who documents pain from a distance, who watches the breakdown and then deems it not my fight. And yet, there's a rusty wedge of something like responsibility in my chest. If I step back now, I'll be stepping back from the only job I've ever found honest and necessary in a life that's too often offered me the counterfeit. Show me the places where this has happened before, I say, and Mara's eyes widen at the careful, practical shift in my voice, the shift from fear to function, from the threat of betrayal to a plan to guard the parts of us that remain intact. Who did these stories belong to last? Who did these fake proofs taint before Mara? Her mouth tightens as if she's gripping a thread she can no longer cull without unraveling herself, but the thread pulls anyway. She tells me about a friend who moved away after a breakup, about a sister who stopped inviting Mara to gatherings, about a cousin who suddenly couldn't verify a single moment in time without the proof that the partner demanded. Each name is a thread in a larger fabric. Each story a notch on a piece of furniture Mara thought would hold up under the weight of truth. The more she speaks, the more I feel the pattern become a river I can trace, the more the pattern becomes a map of every little lie I've swallowed in the past. The way I've told myself that someone's version of reality can be trusted if you're just careful enough with the dates and the receipts and the alibis. I sit with this for a long, suspended breath, and then I do the only reasonable thing left to a survivor. I document. Not for judgment, not for revenge, but to anchor what I know to the ground before gravity gets a chance to pull me into the same whirlpool. My notebook opens with a steady hand I didn't know I possessed, the pen scratching across the page with a reliability that feels almost sacred. I begin by naming the pattern aloud as I write. Fabrications used to displace blame, to isolate Mara from her support system, to weaponize familiarity against the person who deserves to feel safe. I put dates next to every note, cross-reference them with the places Mara would be at those times, with the people who could corroborate or contradict. I create a timeline not for critique, but for clarity, because clarity is the first shield I've learned to lean on. The minutes that follow are spent in a rhythm I've learned to survive by. Mara shares a memory. I record it. We test it against the receipts and the alibis that exist in the world. And together, we pull at the threads until a knot appears that wasn't there before. The act of writing makes the room feel expansive again. A rescue boat on a choppy lake. It gives Mara a way to see herself as someone who can be believed and believed in, not as someone who has to fight for the right to exist without constantly defending her truth. Toward the end, she asks me if I'll stay with her through the night, if I'll be the one who doesn't disappear when the storm grows louder. I tell her I'll stay, that I've learned the gravity of presence is not in the amount of words you possess, but in the willingness to witness. The words come easier after that. Small promises whispered into the space between us. A transferable trust that doesn't rely on a partner's manipulation to survive. The night outside doesn't ease up. The rain keeps tapping the glass, like someone tapping for attention in a house full of sleeping secrets. In our little fortress, we share a silence that isn't lazy or evasive, but honest enough to be painful. And when I finally stand to go, Mara's hug is tight and belated, as if she's trying to steady both of us by squeezing the fear from our bodies and replacing it with something frayed, but genuine, the kind of relief you can only feel after admitting that a wound exists and that you're not lying about it anymore. I drive home with the city's lights smeared into ribbons across the windshield, the sound of the radio muffled by rain and thought. My own memories surface like gulls circling over rough waters. Nights when I believed the surface of a relationship was a safe harbor, only to learn that the harbor was a deception of calm on a sea that never sleeps. The scent of coffee from a late-night shop lingers in my clothes, a petty souvenir that anchors me to a moment when I believed I could keep everything from crashing down. It's a memory I don't want to keep, but it's a memory that won't disappear until I do something with it. Back at my apartment, I sit at the kitchen table and pull out my phone, the little device that has become a confidant and a recorder all at once. I start a new voice memo. A habit I've cultivated like a vow I don't mind breaking if it means keeping some part of me intact. I tell it what I'm naming, the pattern Mara's found right under our noses, a pattern that has shaped not just one friendship, but the willingness of people to doubt someone's truth the moment an explanation arrives with receipts attached to it. I speak slowly, the words growing in the space between the beats of the rain against the window, careful to avoid the trap of vengeance, and instead aim for a map I can use to navigate forward. I tell the memo that I'm seeking grounding through therapy, not merely a cure for the tremors that rise in my chest when a memory threatens to slip into the present and steal the room. The plan is simple, ridiculous in its practicality. Breathing exercises, a grounding object in my pocket, a therapist's voice as a buoy when I feel the water rise around my shoulders. There's a tenderness to that choice, a stubborn insistence on claiming safety as something earned, not something handed to me by the person who holds a key to my past, but can't proper unlock it without permission. I search for the address of a therapist Mara once recommended, or perhaps a name I saw on a flyer in a waiting room I passed 100 times on my way to something I believed would be more than just survival. The process of reaching out me, The person who has spent a lifetime calculating how to disappear if the room becomes too loud, feels like standing at the edge of a cliff and recognizing that there's no other path except forward, even if forward means admitting how fragile the ground is beneath our feet. In the days that follow, I set the objective as a dull, powerful instrument, to document every encounter with the pattern as it reveals itself in real time. The first encounter after Mara's revelation comes through a mutual friend, someone Mara's name popped up with in a message that seemed to come from nowhere, and then, with alarming inevitability, from somewhere else entirely. The friend says there's rumor and there's truth, and the truth feels like a weight in my pocket that won't stop growing. I tell myself to stay quiet enough to listen, loud enough to act if the moment demands it. Grounding, I remind myself, is not a retreat, but a reclaiming of space, of breath, of the part of me that believes in the possibility of a life where trust doesn't demand a forensic accountant's ledger to survive. It's not naive to want that. It's not a sign I'm broken for wanting to believe in people again. It's a vow to protect both Mara and myself from the next time someone weaponizes the past against us, the next time a confidant's name becomes a dossier, the next time a partner's lie masquerades as a shared history, and as my days tilt from one careful step to another, one therapy appointment, one page of notes, one new contact with someone who might understand, the pattern sits in the quiet corners of my mind like a quiet, patient antagonist. It doesn't roar. It breathes. It waits for an opportunity to counterfeit memory, to twist the ache of a wound into a reason to doubt the next person who offers their faith in me. But the more I document, the more I learn to see the lines between us as they actually are. Not a network of betrayals converging on Mara, but a field of vulnerabilities that can be tended with honesty and time. I don't pretend the work will be easy. The trauma is a constant, uninvited guest. The relief of naming it aloud is fragile, easily chipped by a new receipt or a familiar lie wearing a different face. Still, I'm learning that grounding is not the absence of fear, but the practice of moving with it, of letting fear show me where the next safe step is, of choosing to walk that step with a pen in my hand and a therapist's voice steadying my spiral. If nothing else, the pattern has given me a compass. It has shown me that trust can be a choice, that the truth deserves witnesses who won't weaponize it to wound the vulnerable, that a life lived with intention can outlast the cleverest fabrication. Mara and I are not finished with this, not by a long shot. We are at the threshold of something if we can keep the lines of communication open, if we can keep turning toward the light even when the room feels darker than it should. This chapter in Washington State, the rain, the betrayal, the quiet resilience belongs to both of us. And it belongs to the work that remains, to separate the pattern from the person, to guard our hearts with the same careful honesty we've learned to apply to every other truth we've ever wanted to keep alive. I close my notebook and lay a hand over the page as if I can press the truth into the paper and then into the world with the weight of my palm. Outside, the rain continues a patient, unrelenting percussion, the city's breathing syncing with mine in a shared rhythm of survival. The chapter isn't finished, and I'm not sure it ever will be. But I am certain of one thing. I am not stepping back from this discovery. Not now, not ever. I am going to document. I am going to ground. I am going to witness, and with luck, maybe that witness becomes a doorway through which Mara and I, and any of the others who were listening to the wrong voices, can step into a safety that is earned, not given, and never taken for granted again.